My name is Madeline Archer. At 28, I've learned that the people who claim family is everything are usually the ones trying to take everything from you. When I was 19, my parents gave me an ultimatum sign over my $82,400 engineering scholarship to my older brother Dylan or leave. They called me selfish. They told me a daughter didn't need tech, she needed to be a team player for the Archer family legacy. My father looked me in the eye and said my ambition was a sickness. I left that night with one suitcase and exactly $200 in my bank account. Fast forward to last Tuesday. I walked into the Archer Irrigation Systems boardroom in downtown Boise. The air smelled of expensive mahogany and my father's arrogance. My brother, the golden child, COO, who nearly ran the company into the ground, didn't even look up from his phone. Then my legal counsel stood and dropped a 40-page SEC filing on the table. Effective immediately, Madeline Archer holds a 61% controlling interest in this firm. My father's face turned a shade of gray I'll never forget. Dylan jumped up, stammering about loyalty. I just leaned back and said, "I have never given away what belongs to me. Not then, and certainly not now." Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled their empire from the shadows, take a second to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly resonates with you. Also drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is right now. The Archer family legacy in Boise, Idaho was built on the sweat of farmers and the cutting-edge hardware of irrigation. But behind the glossy features in the Boise Business Journal, the internal mechanics of our family functioned like a broken machine, one that prioritized the golden child at any cost. My father, Gregory Archer, viewed himself as a titan of the tech corridor. He ran Archer Irrigation Systems with an iron fist and a narrow mind. To him, the company was a kingdom, and Dylan was the crown prince. The problem was that the crown prince couldn't code a basic Hello World script if his life depended on it. Dylan was the COO by birthright, a title bestowed upon him despite his penchant for high-leverage risks and a fundamental misunderstanding of the very tech we sold. I, on the other hand, was the ghost in the machine. While Dylan was being groomed for leadership through country club mixers and yacht trips, I was in our garage surrounded by circuit boards and sensors. By the time I was 17, I had written a proprietary algorithm that optimized water flow based on real-time soil moisture and weather forecasting. It was a game changer for agritech. But when the prototype was presented to our board, Gregory didn't mention my name. He patted Dylan on the back and told the investors, "My son has a real eye for innovation." My mother Lorna would catch my eye from across the room and give me that practiced, manipulative smile. "Be a team player, Madeline," she'd whisper later while we cleaned up dinner. "A daughter's role is to be the foundation. Stability is what matters for you. Let your brother have the spotlight. He's the one who has to carry the name." I began to realize then that I wasn't a person to them. I was a resource. A backup battery to be drained whenever Dylan's light started to flicker. The tension reached a breaking point during the spring of my senior year. I hadn't just been tinkering in the garage, I had been applying. I secured a full-ride STEM scholarship to a prestigious university, a package valued at $82,400. It was my ticket out of the Boise Tech hub and into a world where my brain belonged to me. I remember the celebratory dinner. I thought perhaps naively that this would be the moment they finally saw me. I showed them the acceptance letter. The silence that followed was forensic. It wasn't the silence of shock. It was the silence of calculation. Gregory didn't congratulate me. He set his fork down, the silver clinking against the porcelain like a gavel. 82,000, he mused. That's a lot of liquid capital the university is tying up in a girl who will likely just get married and leave the industry in 10 years. "I'm not leaving the industry, Dad," I said, my voice steady despite the hammer in my chest. "I'm going to lead it." Lorna reached across the table, her hand cold on mine. "Madeline, honey, we've been looking at Dylan's graduate school options. He didn't get the funding we expected. The expansion for the agritech hardware line is eating up our personal cash flow. If you decline this scholarship and let the board redirect those funds, or if we use the equivalent of what we would have spent on your tuition to bolster Dylan's profile, it helps the family. It helps the company. Dylan needs it more. My father added his tone, shifting into that terrifying paternal gaslighting. You're smart, Madeline. You can work the front desk at the firm, learn the HR side from your mother, and we'll pay for a local community college part-time. But your brother needs to be at a top-tier school to network for our future. They weren't asking. They were informing me of my sacrifice. No, I said. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The golden child Dylan finally spoke up, his voice dripping with the narcissism they had spent 3 decades cultivating. Don't be a brat, Maddie. You're just doing this to spite me. What are you even going to do with an engineering degree? You already do the work for free here anyway. I won't sign the waiver, I replied. Gregory stood up. He didn't scream. That wasn't his style. He used the quiet, crushing weight of authority. If you don't sign that refusal form by tomorrow morning, you are proving that you aren't part of this family. You are a contractor. And I don't keep contractors in my house who don't serve the interests of the firm. That night, I stayed awake listening to the sounds of the Boise night. I realized that my mother's stability was a cage. My father's legacy was a debt I was expected to pay with my life. And Dylan was just a void they were trying to fill with my potential. I wasn't their daughter. I was a scapegoat meant to be slaughtered for the golden child's success. I looked at my bank account, $200. I looked at my laptop, which contained the raw data for my latest sensor algorithm, the one I had been smart enough to keep on an encrypted external drive, not the company server. I didn't wait for morning. I packed one suitcase. I took my $82,400 ticket to freedom and left a note on the kitchen island that simply said, "Investment retracted." As I drove away from the Archer estate, I watched the smart irrigation sprinklers powered by my code watering the lawn. I made a silent vow one day I wouldn't just be the ghost in the machine. I would be the one who owned the hardware, the software, and the land it sat on. The first domino had fallen, and as it fell, it revealed a path they never expected me to take. I wasn't going to community college. I was going to war. The morning after I refused to sign away my future, the air in our Boise home was thick with a clinical, suffocating silence. It wasn't the silence of a family in mourning. It was the silence of a corporation preparing to terminate a redundant asset. My father, Gregory, had called a family meeting in the formal dining room. This was the arena where he exercised his most potent form of control. He sat at the head of the table, flanked by Dylan and my mother, Lorna. I was made to sit at the far end, the physical distance between us, a cold foreshadowing of the legal and emotional chasm about to open. Madeline. My father began, his voice devoid of paternal warmth. We've reviewed the situation. Your refusal to cooperate with the family's financial restructuring regarding that scholarship is more than just teenage rebellion. It is a breach of trust. It's an engineering scholarship, Dad, I said, my voice sounding foreign even to me, hollow yet sharp. I earned it. My SAT scores, my GPA, and my sensor algorithm earned it. Dylan didn't even apply for it. Dylan let out a derisive snort, leaning back in his chair with the unearned confidence of a golden child. It's about the Archer brand, Maddie. If I go to a top-tier school with the right backing, the company's valuation triples. You going to a STEM program doesn't move the needle for the family firm. You're being a narcissist, thinking your little career is more important than the legacy we've all built. The irony was staggering. The boy who had never spent a single night debugging a line of code was calling me a narcissist for wanting to keep the reward for my own labor. Lorna chimed in, her voice dripping with the gaslighting she had perfected over decades. Honey, we just want you to be happy. But happiness comes from belonging. If you choose this scholarship over your brother's future, you're choosing to stand alone. Is that really what you want, to be a stranger to your own blood? I want what I worked for, I replied. The atmosphere shifted from manipulative to predatory. My father stood up, reaching into his blazer pocket. He pulled out a stack of documents: my birth certificate, my passport, and a single printed page from our bank. I've spent 19 years investing in you, Madeline. Gregory said, his eyes as cold as the irrigation pipes we manufactured. I provided the roof, the food, and the tools you used to develop your little projects. I considered that family R&D. But if you aren't willing to pay dividends back to this family when called upon, then the investment is a loss. He took my joint debit card from the table and snapped it in half. The sound was like a bone breaking. The accounts are closed, he continued. The credit line in your name is deactivated. Since you're so independent, you can find your own way to pay for your books and your meals. Are you serious? I whispered. I'm a businessman, Madeline. I don't subsidize competitors. He turned to Dylan. Go get her suitcase. Dylan didn't hesitate. He practically ran upstairs, fueled by a toxic mix of sibling rivalry and the satisfaction of seeing the scapegoat finally discarded. A few minutes later, he returned, dragging my single navy blue suitcase. He didn't hand it to me. He walked past me through the foyer and threw it onto the porch. It hit the wood with a dull thud that echoed through the gated community. If you aren't willing to sacrifice for the family, my father declared, standing over me, then you aren't a part of this family. You have 5 minutes to take your things and leave. Don't call your mother. Don't email Dylan. You wanted your own life. You've got it. I looked at Lorna. She wouldn't meet my eye. She was busy adjusting the centerpiece on the table, already erasing my presence from the room. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I had spent years watching them manipulate people, vendors, employees, and each other. I knew that in this house, tears were just another form of currency, and I was officially bankrupt in their eyes. I stood up, my posture straighter than it had ever been. I walked toward the door, my heels clicking on the hardwood, a forensic rhythmic count of my final seconds as an archer. When I reached the porch, I picked up my suitcase. Dylan was standing in the doorway, a smug, triumphant grin on his face. Have fun at the bus station, Maddie. Hope that scholarship covers a place to sleep. I turned back to look at my father, who was watching me through the glass. You're right, Dad, I said, my voice calm and terrifyingly clear. You are a businessman, but you've made a catastrophic error in your risk assessment. And what's that? He sneered. You think you've fired an employee, I said, but you've actually just released a patent holder. I walked down the driveway without looking back. I had $200 in my pocket and an encrypted drive in my bag. As I reached the edge of the property, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from the bank account ending in -4402 has been closed by the primary owner. I sat on my suitcase at the curb and pulled out a small notebook. I didn't write about my feelings. I wrote down the names of the board members I knew were unhappy with Dylan's performance. I wrote down the specific dates my father had submitted my work to the USPTO under Dylan's name. I wrote down the metadata of my life, the facts, the figures, and the flaws in their armor. I was 19, homeless and technically penniless. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't a backup resource. I was a free agent. And in the world of Boise Agritech, a free agent with a grudge and a genius-level algorithm is the most dangerous thing in the room. The Archer family thought they had pruned a dead branch. They didn't realize they had just planted the seed of their own destruction. The next 5 years were a masterclass in strategic invisibility. While Dylan was busy crashing corporate galas and burning through my father's capital on expansion projects that yielded zero ROI, I was living in a 400-square-foot studio in a gritty corner of Boise, surviving on caffeine and sheer cold-blooded determination. I worked 2 jobs, one as a junior data analyst for a logistics firm, and another pulling graveyard shifts at a tech support center, all while maintaining a 4.0 GPA in my engineering program. I didn't sleep in a bed most nights. I slept in the university computer lab, my head resting on a keyboard, waking up to the hum of servers. It was there that I met Dr. Quentin Hale. Quentin wasn't just a professor. He was a shark in the world of corporate law and intellectual property. He noticed the code I was running on the lab's mainframe, a sophisticated neural network designed to predict supply chain bottlenecks in agricultural hardware. He didn't look at me as the Archer daughter or a team player. He looked at me as a high-value asset. This algorithm is worth more than your family's entire manufacturing plant, Madeline, he told me during a late-night review of my data. But if you don't protect it, men like your father will eat it for breakfast. Under Quentin's mentorship, I didn't just graduate, I built a fortress. He guided me through the USPTOUS patent and trademark office filing process. We registered my core algorithms under a private holding company, ensuring the forensic trail of ownership started and ended with me. I was no longer the ghost in the machine, I was the architect of a new one. At 25, I launched Aegis Agritech. By 27, I had secured a Series A investment of $12.8 million from a venture capital firm in Salt Lake City that had been looking for a way to disrupt the stagnant Boise market. But I didn't buy a yacht or a mansion in Newport Beach. I stayed in my studio, lived on a fraction of my salary, and funneled every spare cent into a shell company, Archer Hale Holdings, LLC. Meanwhile, back at Archer Irrigation Systems, the golden child was failing. Dylan's lack of technical foresight and my father's ego had led them into a catastrophic over-leveraging of their assets. They were desperate for liquidity. They began issuing private stock offerings to keep the lights on, praying for a silent partner to save the family legacy. I was that partner. Through my LLC, I began buying. Every time my father put up a block of shares to cover a debt or fund another one of Dylan's failed innovation prototypes, I was there. I bought 5%, then 12%, then 28%. I watched the SEC Form D filings like a hawk. I knew their burn rate, their debt-to-equity ratio, and their mounting desperation. To them, I was just an anonymous group of investors from Utah. To me, it was a slow-motion execution. I spent those years mastering the art of the gray rock method. On the rare occasions my mother Lorna would reach out, usually to brag about Dylan's latest achievement in a local business magazine, I responded with vague, polite monosyllables. "Dylan's leading the new expansion, Madeline," she'd say over a 30-second phone call. "It's a shame you chose to be so difficult. You could have been a part of this." "I'm glad he's busy, Mom," I'd reply, staring at a screen that showed I had just acquired another 4% of their voting rights. "I'm doing just fine. Look." They had no idea that while they were trying to maintain the image of a Boise power family, I was holding the deed to their throne. I wasn't just successful, I was essential. And they were about to find out that the resource they discarded had become the only person on Earth who could decide if they survived the night. I want to pause here for a moment. Have you ever been humiliated, underestimated, or betrayed by your own family? Have you ever been told you weren't enough only to realize you were the most powerful person in the room? If you've ever been in this position, comment the word "strong" below. It lets me know I'm not alone in this. And if you want to see the look on my father's face when I finally walked into that boardroom to claim what's mine, keep watching. The Boise morning was crisp, the kind of cold that bites through wool coats and reminds you exactly where you stand. I stood in front of the Archer Irrigation Systems headquarters, a building that once felt like a fortress I was forbidden from entering. Now it just looked like a liability. The company was bleeding. Years of Dylan's strategic pivots, which were really just expensive ways to mask his incompetence, had led to a catastrophic cash flow crisis. They had over-leveraged their manufacturing plant to fund a hardware expansion that relied on tech they didn't actually own. My tech. I smoothed my blazer, checked the digital copy of the Idaho Secretary of State Business Registry on my tablet, and nodded to Dr. Quentin Hale, who stood beside me. He wasn't just my mentor anymore, he was my lead counsel. "Ready to collect the debt, Madeline?" he asked. "Every cent," I replied. We walked into the boardroom. The atmosphere was frantic. My father, Gregory, was pacing the length of the mahogany table, his tie loosened, a rare sign of crack in his narcissistic armor. My mother, Lorna, was nervously pouring coffee, her eyes darting toward the door every time it creaked. Dylan was slumped in his chair, looking at his Rolex as if he could sell the seconds for liquidity. When the door opened, they all looked up with a desperate, hungry hope. They were expecting a representative from Archer Hale Holdings, LLC, the anonymous savior who had been buying up their distressed shares and providing the life support they so desperately needed. Their faces went through a forensic transition: confusion, then recognition, then a deep, condescending disappointment. "Madeline." Lorna gasped, the coffee pot hovering precariously over a cup. "What on earth are you doing here? This is a closed shareholder meeting." Dylan let out a sharp, jagged laugh. "Jesus, Maddie, did you see the news about the crisis and decide to come crawling back for a job? We're a little busy trying to save the company you abandoned. Go wait in the lobby. Maybe HR can find you a filing position once we're solvent." My father didn't laugh. He looked at me with a weary, paternal disdain that used to make my blood run cold. Now it felt like white noise. "Madeline, I don't have time for your theatrics. We are waiting for a major institutional investor. If you've come to apologize for the scholarship stunt and ask for a handout, you're 6 years too late. Leave. Now." I didn't move. I walked to the opposite end of the table, the seat traditionally reserved for the chairman, and pulled it out. "You're right, Dad," I said, my voice projecting with a cold, analytical clarity. "You are waiting for a major investor. And since I own the majority of the voting rights in this room, I think it's only fair that I take my seat." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence you find in a courtroom right before a verdict is read. "What are you talking about?" Gregory stammered, his face flushing a dangerous shade of red. "The investor is a firm called Archer Hale Holdings, a venture group from Salt Lake." Quentin Hale stepped forward, placing a thick folder of SEC Form D filings and share transfer records on the table. "Actually, Gregory, Archer Hale Holdings is a wholly owned subsidiary of Aegis Agritech, and Aegis Agritech is 100% owned by Madeline Archer." He slid a document across the table. It was the updated shareholder registry. "As of 9 a.m. this morning," Quentin continued, "Madeline Archer holds 61% of the common stock and a controlling interest in the Series B preferred shares. She isn't here to ask for a job. She's here because she owns the building, the patents, and the very chair you're sitting in." Lorna dropped the coffee pot. The ceramic shattered on the floor, brown liquid seeping into the expensive rug, a perfect metaphor for the Archer legacy. You bought us. With what money? You were a waitress." "I was a founder, Mom," I said, leaning forward. "While you were busy telling everyone how Dylan was the future of the industry, I was actually building it. I didn't just get a degree. I built a supply chain AI that makes your irrigation hardware look like a garden hose from the 1950s. Dylan stood up, his chair screeching against the floor. "This is a setup. This has to be illegal. You used a shell company to hostilely take over your own father. That's betrayal, Madeline. Where is your loyalty to the family?" "Family." I asked, the word tasting like ash. "Is that the same family that threw my suitcase on the porch because I wouldn't let you steal my scholarship? Is it the family that spent 5 years pretending I didn't exist while you put my name on personal guarantees for loans I never signed?" I opened my tablet and projected a document onto the boardroom screen. It was a forensic metadata report of their latest loan application. "I've been watching your filings for years," I said, my eyes locked on my father's. "I saw when you tried to use my old sensor patents, the ones I registered in my own name before I left, as collateral. That's called fraud, Gregory. and as the majority shareholder, I have a fiduciary duty to report it. Or, I can exercise my right to restructure. Gregory looked like he had aged 20 years in 20 seconds. The authority twist was complete. The man who had once told me I was a loss on his balance sheet was now staring at the person who held his entire life in her hands. "What do you want?" he whispered. "I want exactly what you told me to value 6 years ago." I replied, a small, sharp smile touching my lips. "I want a sound business decision. And in my professional opinion, this company is top-heavy with redundant, incompetent management." I looked at Dylan, who was trembling. Then I looked at Lorna, who was finally looking at me, not as a daughter, but with the terrified respect people reserve for a predator. "The meeting will now come to order," I said. Item 1 on the agenda, the immediate removal of the CEO and COO. The silence in the room was no longer just a pause. It was a physical weight pressing the oxygen out of the lungs of everyone bearing the Archer name. Dr. Quentin Hale stepped forward, his movements practiced and surgical, as he began laying out the evidence architecture on the mahogany table like a deck of cards that were all aces. "Let's look at the paper trail," Quentin said, his voice echoing in the stillness. He projected the first document onto the 85-inch screen, the Idaho Secretary of State Business Registry update. It was the cold, hard proof of the Archer Hale Holdings LLC takeover. The filing was dated 48 hours ago, showing the transfer of the 61% controlling interest. My father stared at the digital seal of the state of Idaho as if he were looking at his own death warrant. "But that's just the shell," I said, stepping toward the screen. "Let's talk about the heart of this company." I swiped my tablet and the USPTO patent ownership certificate appeared. "You've been marketing the Archer Flow 2.0 as Dylan's brainchild for the last 3 years. But according to the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office under 35 U.S. Code Section 261, the ownership of the underlying algorithm belongs to me. I filed this as an independent student the week after you threw me out. It was never company property. It was never Dylan's. It was mine." Dylan's hand started to shake so violently his Rolex rattled against the table. That was a joint project. I gave you the parameters." "You gave me a headache, Dylan," I countered. "And you gave the investors a lie." Quentin then brought up the SEC Form D filing. "This is where it becomes a criminal matter, Gregory. You raised $5.2 million in a private placement last year. In your disclosures to the Securities and Exchange Commission, you claimed the firm held an exclusive royalty-free license to this technology. Since you never secured a transfer from Madeline, this filing is a material misrepresentation. That is, securities fraud." My father's face went from red to a sickly, translucent white. He tried to speak, but only a dry wheeze came out. "And just in case you wanted to claim you didn't know," I added, "let's listen to the metadata of your intentions." I pressed a button on my tablet. The room was filled with a grainy but clear recording from a board meeting 6 months ago. In Idaho, one-party consent is the law, and a disgruntled board member had been more than happy to help me. "We don't need to worry about the girl." My father's voice boomed from the speakers. "She's probably working in some lab in the Midwest. She'll never find out we used her drafts. Even if she does, she doesn't have the capital to sue us. This technology is the only thing keeping the bank from foreclosing on the Boise plant. Just keep Dylan's name on the marketing materials." The recording cut off. The humiliation was forensic. Every lie, every act of gaslighting, and every attempt to bury my talent for the sake of their golden child was now archived in high definition. Lorna looked at the floor, her hands trembling in her lap. She had spent a decade telling me that family priorities justified their theft. Now she realized that those priorities had led them into a legal minefield where the only person who could save them was the daughter they had treated as a disposable resource. Dylan looked like he wanted to vomit. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the sheer pathetic terror of a man who realized he had no talent and now no safety net. You sat at that Thanksgiving table and told me I was a loss. I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that felt louder than a scream. You threw my suitcase into the Idaho mud. You thought you were protecting a legacy, but you were just guarding an empty vault. I'm not a loss, Dad. I'm the debt that's finally come due. Gregory finally looked up, his eyes glassy. Madeline, please. We can talk about this. We're family. No, I replied, standing tall as the majority owner of everything he held dear. In this room, we are just a secured creditor and a failing management team. And I've decided to stop subsidizing the failure. I'm going to pause right here because the next part is where the walls truly close in. Before I tell you the final ultimatum I gave them, I have a question for you. If you held the power to either save the people who betrayed you or watch them lose it all to prove a point, which would you choose? Comment mercy or justice below. And if you're enjoying this deep dive into corporate and family revenge, make sure you've hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the grand finale. The atmosphere in the boardroom had shifted from a corporate meeting to a forensic deconstruction of the Archer family myth. My father, Gregory, reached out across the mahogany table, his hand trembling. The man who had once loomed over me like an immovable mountain now looked like a crumbling statue. Madeline, he rasped, his voice cracking. Think about what you're doing. Business is business, but family is family. We can fix this. We can bring you back into the fold. You can be the CEO, I'll stay on as chairman. We can keep the Archer name at the top of the Boise Tech Hub together. My mother, Lorna, finally found her voice, though it was thin and desperate. She walked toward me, her hand reaching for mine with that same manipulative softness she used to use to convince me to stay small. Honey, your father is right. We made mistakes, yes, but we are your blood. You belong with us, not against us. Don't let a few years of anger destroy 30 years of history. I pulled my hand back before she could touch me. The sensation was cold, not of anger, but of a total clinical lack of connection. We have shared DNA, Lorna, I said, using her first name for the first time in my life. The flinch she gave was visible. But we are not a family. A family doesn't treat a child's intellect as a communal resource to be looted. A family doesn't throw a 19-year-old girl out onto the street with $200 because she dared to own her own future. You're taking this too far, Maddie Dillon shouted, though the bravado was gone, replaced by the high-pitched whine of a golden child losing his shine. So we pushed you a little hard on the scholarship. It was for the company. Everything we did was for the company. You're being emotional. You're acting like a narcissist who needs to punish everyone just because things didn't go your way. I looked at Dylan, the man-child who had spent my entire life standing on my shoulders while telling everyone he was flying. I'm not being emotional, Dylan. I'm being efficient. You are the COO of a company that is currently defaulting on its debt because you lack the technical literacy to manage the assets. That isn't family drama. That is a management failure. I turned to Dr. Quentin Hale. He handed me a thick stack of legal documents already stamped and ready for the Idaho 4th Judicial District Court. This, I said, sliding the first document to Dylan, is your formal termination notice effective immediately. Your access to company accounts, the corporate vehicle, and the Archer irrigation system servers has been revoked as of 5 minutes ago. Security is currently clearing out your office. Dylan stared at the paper as if it were written in a foreign language. You can't fire me. I'm the COO. I'm the majority shareholder, I replied. I can, and I just did. Then I turned to my father. I placed a second document in front of him. And this is for you, Gregory. It's a formal demand for your resignation as CEO. If you sign it, I will allow you to keep your minority shares and retire quietly. If you don't, Quentin will file the shareholder derivative complaint we've prepared. My father's eyes scanned the document. A derivative lawsuit. On what grounds breach of fiduciary duty, commingling of personal and corporate assets, and the fraudulent use of my intellectual property to secure SEC-regulated funding, I stated my voice, a flat, forensic monotone. If this goes to the commercial division of the 4th District Court, every detail of how you ran this company into the ground while trying to steal my patents will be public record. The Boise Tech Hub will watch your reputation dissolve in real time. The room went silent again. The weight of the evidence architecture I had built over 5 years was now a noose. Gregory Archer, the titan of agritech, looked at the pen in front of him. He looked at Lorna, who was weeping silently, and then at Dylan, who was scrolling frantically through his phone, likely realizing his corporate credit card was already dead. With a shaking hand, my father picked up the pen. He signed the resignation. The sound of the nib scratching against the paper was the only sound in the room, the sound of an empire being dismantled by the very person they thought was too unstable to lead it. "There," he whispered, sliding the paper back. "You've won. Are you happy now? You've destroyed your father?" "I didn't destroy you, Dad," I said, standing up and tucking the signed document into my folder. "I just stopped holding you up." "There's a difference." Lorna stepped forward, her face a mask of grief. "Can't we at least talk about this over dinner just once?" As a family, I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized I felt nothing. No hate, no love, just the peace of a closed book. "I have a Series B closing call at noon and a board meeting to restructure this firm at 2. I don't have time for dinner." I didn't offer a hug. I didn't wait for an apology I knew would be hollow. I signaled to the 2 security guards waiting at the door. "Please escort Mr. Dylan Archer and the former CEO from the premises," I said. As they were let out, Dylan was still shouting about loyalty, and my mother was still calling my name, but I was already looking at the SEC Form D on my tablet, calculating the cost of the rebranding. I sat down at the head of the table. The chair was cold, but it fit me perfectly. I had set my boundaries in steel and ink. I hadn't just survived the Archer family, I had acquired them. And for the first time in my life, the air in Boise felt easy to breathe. The aftermath of the takeover wasn't marked by a grand celebration or a sudden rush of warmth. Instead, it was marked by the quiet industrial hum of a company finally running at peak efficiency. 6 months later, Archer Irrigation Systems, now rebranded as Aegis Archer Tech, is the leading agritech firm in the Pacific Northwest. Dylan is currently working a mid-level sales job in another state, far away from the golden child pedestal he never earned. My parents live in a modest house 2 hours outside of Boise, their influence on the tech hub reduced to a footnote in a cautionary business article. I don't hate them. Hate is a high-energy emotion, and they no longer deserve that kind of investment from me. People often ask if I feel guilty for taking down my family. My answer is always the same: I didn't destroy them. I simply stopped allowing them to destroy me. There is a profound difference between revenge and restoration. Revenge is about causing pain. Restoration is about reclaiming the value that was always yours. By setting a forensic boundary, I didn't just save a company, I saved the version of myself that was almost buried in that Boise garage 10 years ago. Your value is not determined by the people who are too small to see your potential. It is not a communal property to be managed by those who claim family loyalty only when it benefits their own bank accounts. Family is a choice made through respect and support, not a biological contract used to enforce silence. Setting a boundary isn't an act of war, it's an act of self-preservation. Your value is not defined by others. Family is a choice, not just bloodlines. Setting boundaries isn't revenge, it's self-protection. I didn't destroy them. I just stopped letting them destroy me. Thank you for staying until the very end of the story. If this story resonated with you, please hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Please share your own story in the comments below. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, check out the link in the description. Goodbye for now.